It's quite possible to train for the small sword using a foil if you do it correctly. Keep in mind that the foil was created to be the practice weapon for the small sword. The foil and the small sword are not two different weapons. The foil was never a weapon. It was a training tool. So understanding that, how can you use a foil to train most effectively for using the real weapon? Start by understanding what the real weapon is. Small sword has two basic varieties, in my opinion. There's a small sword that has a triangular shaped blade that is almost exclusively, if not exclusively, designed to use the point. There are edges, but they are not sharpened. They're not cutting edges. You're not going to deliver a cutting blow with it. That's one type of small sword. Another type, which I prefer, is a small sword that has a flattened diamond section blade. That is, it's rapier-like. It has cutting edges. This particular type is a Kolishmard. It has a very, very heavy area to parry with, but it's quite narrow at the point. Nevertheless, the edges are sharp, and you're not going to be taking anybody's head off with it, but you ever had a real bad facial cut? Ever done any boxing? You ever get a cut above your eye on your brow and have that sucker bleed into your eyes and down your face and see what it does to your ability to see and fight? Well, anyway, so it can deliver a nasty little cut, and a cut like that delivered to a bare neck where your jugular just happens to be could be unpleasant. So to be able to cut, to be able to inflict damage with a cut, you don't have to have a big heavy saber or long sword or battle axe, you know. Okay, so those are the two basic kinds of small swords, right? One that is strictly the thrust and one that is cut and thrust. Both of those have very little quillin to them. In a perfect world, I would prefer more quillin because I use them. But that's another subject. So the foist thing is to try and make your practice tool as close to the real deal as you can. When you buy a foil, you're quite likely to wind up with something like this. It's got a French grip on it, and a round guard, and a quadrangular blade that is about a number 10 spaghetti. That's a way to start. Now, you could train with this, and if you train correctly, that is to say, first if you hold the blade correctly and understand that the blade has edges and that you align your thumb and your index finger at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, and that's where the edges are, at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. That's important because you'll use the edges when you parry and when you beat. So the first thing I would recommend is to replace that circular guard with a bilobate or figure eight guard, something like that. Those notches in the guard, that's where the cutting edges of the blade are. So those belong at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, and your thumb and index finger at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock aligned with those cutting edges. So this is up. That places the French grip correctly in your hand. Many people who use a French grip do not hold it correctly. That's the first thing. The next thing I recommend is throwing away that French grip and getting or making something that more closely approximates a small sword grip. Right? Probably oval. Not necessarily, but oval's a good shape. And it's no longer than the width of your hand. Right? The grip on that foil is too damn long. Okay? This is more like it. Don't believe me? Compare. Compare. Okay? So a figure 8 guard and a more appropriate handle. Then the next most important thing is the blade. And I recommend getting the heaviest possible blade you can. Probably triangular, not necessarily. You might be able to find a good flat blade someplace. I didn't mention that the arms on the small sword diminish down over time to almost nothing. On earlier small swords, they're bigger. People make the change in style from the rapier, which has quite large arms, to the small sword, which diminishes. I like the arms of the hilt. I like them about, I have relatively small hands, so I like them about the size that you'll find on what has become a standard Italian foil. So for myself, I would take those arms on a bi-lobate guard with a heavy triangular blade, or a flat blade if I can get it. So you can put together something that is relatively more reminiscent of the real deal than your out-of-the-box plug-and-play foil, if you want. You don't have to. If you understand what you're doing, if you understand the reality of the weapon, you can practice with a baseball bat, it doesn't matter. So what part of training do we use the light, flexible, bendy blade like against the wall? And in what part of training do we use something that is not going to bend? It's not going to bend hardly at all. We use the real weapon when we do etudes, solos, practice, what karate guys would call kata. That's the real thing. And remember always, kata is far more real than anything else. It's more real than sparring, it's more real than taking a lesson, it's more real than drills or anything like that. Kata is real because you can practice things in it that you cannot practice with a partner without killing them. So, this is the weapon you use for that practice, and that's the only practice I do anymore. I do solo etudes, and I do them all out. And maybe I'll show you that sometime. For the rest, when you're taking a lesson or practicing with a partner, something that will bend so you don't hurt them when you hit, that's okay. That's okay. You can have quite a small swordish grip. You can still use it the way you know it's supposed to be used, if you know it's supposed to be used. And still you can have a blade that's quite soft so that when you hit somebody, it doesn't hurt them. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Don't be one of these lunatics that thinks they have to get bruised up every practice or they're not practicing well. If you get bruised up in practice, there's a fairly good chance you're an idiot. I think that's all I have for you.